Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a morning that literally changed the world, December 7th, 1941. It's a story packed with high-stakes geopolitical brinkmanship, some truly catastrophic intelligence failures, and a terrifyingly precise military strike that completely altered the course of the 20th century. We're going to dive deep into exactly how and why the Empire of Japan had launched a surprise attack on the U.S. Pacific Fleet in Hawaii, and how that single morning fundamentally reshaped the globe. Let's get right into it.
Yesterday, December 7, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. Now, you've probably heard those historic words from President Franklin D. Roosevelt before. He delivered them to a joint session of Congress the very next day, and they really established the solemn gravity of what we're looking at today. Those words didn't just define the attack for generations, they marked the exact moment the U.S. was irreversibly pulled right into the horrors of World War II. But, to really understand why those bombs fell in the first place, we have to rewind the clock a bit.
Part 1. Prelude to War. The Geopolitical Roots.
So going into this, the United States and Japan were on a massive geopolitical collision course. Think of it like two trains speeding toward each other. On one side, American foreign policy in the Pacific was heavily focused on supporting China. So when Japan started expanding into Chinese territory in the late 1930s, the U.S. pushed back hard with strict economic sanctions and trade embargoes, cutting off critical stuff like scrap metal and, crucially, oil. On the other side, the Japanese government felt totally cornered, both economically and demographically. To keep their military machine running, they felt they absolutely had to expand into Southeast Asia to grab resource-rich European colonies. But there was one huge obstacle standing in their way: the U.S. Pacific Fleet sitting in Hawaii. Japan knew they had to secure those resources fast, right before their own oil gauge hit empty.
Part 2. Planning the preemptive strike.
Now, to American intelligence at the time, Hawaii seemed like a pretty unlikely target, but Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the commander-in-chief of Japan's combined fleet, looked at things differently. He viewed a preemptive strike on Pearl Harbor as a necessary gamble. See, Yamamoto actually knew that in a long, drawn-out war of industrial attrition, the U.S. would inevitably win because of its massive manufacturing power. So his strategy? Destroy the American fleet in one swift, crushing blow at Pearl Harbor, quickly conquer Southeast Asia for those needed resources, and then build a heavily fortified defensive perimeter. The ultimate goal wasn't actually to invade the U.S. mainland. They just wanted to demoralize the American public enough to force the U.S. government into a negotiated peace.
Part 3. The Attack on Pearl Harbor. The execution of this plan was meticulous. A massive Japanese fleet of 6 aircraft carriers, plus battleships, cruisers, and subs, managed to cross the vast Pacific Ocean completely undetected. How? By hiding near a severe storm front and strictly enforcing radio silence. And when you look at the timeline of that morning, it's basically a tragic ticking clock of missed warnings. At 7 a.m., U.S. Army Private George Elliott is practicing on a new radar set and spots an unusually large flight of planes. He alerts his lieutenant, but he's told to just ignore it, tragically mistaking this massive incoming armada for a scheduled flight of American B-17 bombers. Just 55 minutes later, the first Japanese dive bomber screams out of the sky. By 8:10 a.m., a massive 1,800-pound armor-piercing bomb strikes the battleship USS Arizona. And by 9 a.m., after a relentless, furious assault, the Japanese forces withdraw, leaving an entirely devastated harbor in their wake.
The sheer violent chaos that erupted across the harbor was absolute. We're talking massive torpedo strikes right along Battleship Row. And what made things exponentially worse was the situation on the nearby airfields like Ford Island and Hickam Field. The American military aircraft there were packed tightly together, literally wing to wing. And this wasn't an accident. It was actually a deliberate anti-sabotage measure ordered by the local commander, General Short. He was way more worried about local ground sabotage than an aerial attack. But tragically, grouping them like that meant Japanese fighters could easily wipe out hundreds of American planes on the ground in simple strafing runs, making any kind of coordinated aerial defense virtually impossible.
The U.S. base was caught completely flat-footed by the overwhelming power of the attacking Japanese fighters, dive bombers, and torpedo bombers coming in 2 distinct waves. The mechanical destruction was staggering. Destroyers reduced to tangled heaps of burning metal right inside the dry docks. And to pull this off, the Japanese actually used specially modified torpedoes fitted with wooden fins. This brilliant technical innovation allowed the torpedoes to operate in the shallow 42-foot waters of Pearl Harbor, something American engineers previously believed was totally impossible.
Part 4. Casualties and Devastation.
By the time the smoke began to clear, nearly 20 American ships were sunk or crippled, including severe damage to every single one of the Pacific Fleet's 8 battleships, and over 300 aircraft were destroyed or damaged. But as staggering as the loss of twisted steel and burning oil was, the human cost was just so much more devastating.
Let's just pause for a second to really let this number sink in. 2,403 Americans were killed in less than 2 hours. That tragic figure includes 68 civilians caught in the crossfire, and over 1,000 more people were wounded. Half of the military dead were entombed within the hull of the U.S. Arizona alone. And it's incredibly vital to remember that all of these casualties happened before any formal declaration of war. A 14-part Japanese diplomatic message breaking off negotiations was actually delayed in its decoding and delivery in Washington. So when the bombs started falling, technically the two nations were still at peace.
Part 5. The Aftermath and Legacy.
Now, as we look at the aftermath, we uncover the great strategic irony of Pearl Harbor, and it's all about what the Japanese missed. The absolutely crucial American aircraft carriers, the Enterprise, Lexington, and Saratoga, were actually out at sea. And as we now know, World War II in the Pacific would be dictated by carriers, not the slow, heavily armored battleships of the past. On top of that, the Japanese strike force commanders decided to withdraw without launching a potential third wave. This means they completely ignored the massive onshore oil storage depots, the naval repair facilities, and the submarine pens. Because those crucial pieces of infrastructure were spared, the U.S. Navy was able to bounce back, repair their salvaged ships, and launch counteroffensives way faster than Tokyo ever thought possible.
So, ultimately, even though it was a stunning tactical success in the short term, historians view the attack as a massive fatal blunder, literally a monstrous error by the government in Tokyo. See, before December 7th, there was actually a ton of anti-war and isolationist sentiment across the United States. If Japan had only attacked British and Dutch colonies in Asia, it is highly debatable whether FDR could have convinced Congress to declare war. But the sheer shock and the perceived treachery of the Pearl Harbor attack, it instantly unified a previously divided American public with absolute unshakable resolve. It prepared the U.S., with its unmatched industrial capacity, headfirst into World War II.
Today, the USS Arizona Memorial rests peacefully right above the sunken battleship and its fallen crew. It's a stark reminder of the fragility of peace and the immense cost of conflict. But looking back at the events of that morning leaves us with some really profound historical questions to think about. I mean, how different might the entire 20th century have been if Japan had launched that third wave and wiped out the oil fields? Or what if Pivot Elliott's radar warning at 7 a.m. hadn't been ignored? The echoes of December 7th really remind us that history often pivots on the absolute thinnest of margins. Thanks for joining us for this explainer, and keep questioning the history that shapes our world.